Welcome, everybody, to Mind in America and joining Greg Huffman and I today. Hi, Greg.
Morning, Janet. How are you?
I am well. It's an interesting day to have a fabulous guest. It's the day after we've had the tariff announcement. So I think I'll introduce our guest, but first, would you like to do a quick mining minute?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks very much. And yeah, definitely very opportune timing to have our guests who we'll introduce in just a minute. But first, I think a few weeks ago we talked about how April 1st of 2025 marks the 50th anniversary of the development of the in situ recovery technology. And we're actually going to be marking this with a celebration as part of a reception at the upcoming Texas Nuclear Day, taking place on Thursday, April the 10th. So next week from when we're recording this in Austin, Texas. And this is an initiative by the Texas Nuclear Alliance, as well as the Clean Energy Association of New Mexico. In situ recovery is an incredibly important technology for the uranium sector. Over 60% of the world's uranium is produced with in situ recovery related techniques. And we're holding this event in order to recognize the innovation that ISR has made it the leading technology for recovery of uranium globally. It will include a proclamation acknowledging the development of the ISR technology, which happened in Texas at the Clay West project, and highlight its ongoing role and advancement over the next 50 years as we move through that. There's going to be a number of events over the course of that day, culminating with a reception for the ISR technology to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And actually, we're going to have a number of the founding pioneers of the ISR technology at the event as well, which will make it really special, including Dr. Dennis Stover, who's a very important part of the team at Encore, a director, very active in terms of the current operations. He was a real pioneer in terms of the ISR technology. In fact, Encore Energy earlier today announced the establishment of the Dr. Dennis Stover Fellowship at Texas A&M University, Kingsville, through the Encore Energy Education Society. So this is something that's being put in place. It's a fellowship for graduate students pursuing a master's degree in chemical engineering. It's a cause very, very close to Dr. Stover's heart, and it's a merit-based fellowship designed to support students demonstrating academic excellence, leadership potential, and a commitment to advancing engineering and nuclear technology. So a really, really great cause. So we're very excited to have that happening next week in Austin.
Thank you, Greg. I also want to give a shout out to a group I started in New Mexico called the Clean Energy Association of New Mexico, which allowed me to really work on putting this all together for the 50th. So thank you to them. Speaking of New Mexico, I have been doing a lot of work there and looking forward to many years doing so. One of the wonderful benefits of working in New Mexico is I have gotten to know our new guest today, Mr. Jon Indall. Jon is joining us from Santa Fe. I probably talk to Jon on email every week. He's the Senior Policy Advisor for the Uranium Producers of America, but also quite noticeable in the state of New Mexico and knowledgeable. Hello, Jon.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, maybe as a bit of an intro, just give us a bit about yourself. I know you, so it's I'm coming from a position of advantage, but please introduce yourself.
Okay, well, I started out, I'm an attorney, and I started practicing law in the uranium field in 1978 when I joined the firm of Bigby Stevenson, Carpenter, Kraut, and Olmsted. It evolved into Maldegen, Templeman, and Indall over the years. We represented the major uranium companies in New Mexico at that time: Homestake, Kerr-McGee, United Nuclear, and so forth. And in 1985, we started the Uranium Producers of America, which was a trade group that our mission is to promote the viability of the domestic uranium industry. And through various events, I became the counsel for that group and have been doing it ever since. In 2005, we reorganized the group after a period of time where we weren't getting much production and so forth. But when we had a little bit of a nuclear renaissance, we started up the group again, and we've been very active, primarily on the federal level. This past year was a banner year for the UPA. We were able to get the Russian Prohibiting Russian Uranium Import Act passed through Congress unanimously, which is unusual in this world. And that was in May of 2024. And then we also were instrumental in the Nuclear Fuel Security Act passage as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which provided $2.7 billion to revitalize the nuclear fuel cycle. So I've retired from the practice of law, but I'm still involved with UPA. I was in Washington last week, as a matter of fact, doing the rounds with Congress, DOE, and Commerce Department. So that gives you a little bit about me.
Perfect. Thanks, John. No, that's a great background. Maybe I'll kick off and maybe the imperative for asking John to come onto the podcast really was 2 weeks ago on March 20th, President Trump signed an executive order titled "Immediate Measures to Increase American Mineral Production," and that really got us thinking that we should have someone on to who could speak to that aspect and maybe specifically as it relates to uranium and John with his role as a senior policy advisor for the UPA or Uranium Producers of America, we thought would be a great guest to have on to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So, but maybe before we get into that specific executive order, John, very topical here over the last day or so is the reciprocal tariffs that have been put in place on April 2nd, with a lot of consternation in the broader equity markets as it relates to that. John, maybe if you could sort of walk us through. Obviously, it's there's so a lot to unpack in terms of understanding, but what do you understand in terms of potential implications on uranium specifically from the reciprocal tariffs?
Sure. Well, it's my understanding, and again, this is very, very recent, so I'm still trying to dig into it myself. But I believe that if you're, as far as the Canadian material, as long as they're in compliance with the U.S., Mexican, Canadian agreement that was done in the first Trump administration, that material would be excluded from any tariffs with Canada. The reciprocal tariffs, I believe, have excluded uranium in a whole list of minerals and energy materials that are supposedly not available in the U.S., which I don't agree with, but that seems to be what occurred. So I believe we still have an existing tariff with China of 20% in place under the Emergency Economic Powers Act that was done some time ago. We have applied with the USTR. The UPA has applied with the USTR trade rep to increase Chinese tariffs, but there's been no action on that request at this point.
And thank you, John. And I'm sure we both have a lot of questions today. How does the tariffs impact Kazakhstan and Russian material and shipping, or do you know?
Well, the Russian material right now is banned under the Import Act, but there's a provision in that act to allow for waivers. The waivers were supposed to be strictly imposed if a reactor could come to DOE and show that they couldn't run their reactor. We didn't want anybody to have to shut down. And there was also a national interest provision in the Russian Import Act. But the waivers that were granted in 2025 were fairly liberally granted. DOE is now, in our last meeting with DOE, they indicated that they were going to start looking at this again. We hope that they'll be a little more strict this time. Some waivers were granted with Centrus, who were importing Russian uranium based on the idea that they would go bankrupt if they didn't have that material. We think that was a little bit misguided, but that's what happened. The utilities, we urge DOE to look at their what they had, in the bank, and not to just look at costs and convenience. And again, it remains to be seen how DOE will act under this new administration. The DOE secretary has indicated in both his hearing for confirmation hearing that he is fully supports the ban, so that's a good thing. As far as the Kazakhstan tariffs, I believe the reciprocal tariff on Kazakhstan was 27%, but again, we are excluded from those. So uranium is excluded from the reciprocal tariffs. So I'm not sure how, I don't think the tariffs are going to have a big impact on material that comes in from Kazakhstan. Of course, there are shipping issues right now on material from Kazakhstan, and it appears that they're focusing more on Russia and China for their material. So we'll see how that plays out.
And I would assume that the recent announcements out of Kazakhstan about the joint venture splits also a factor in where the uranium will be going.
That's correct.
Okay. I'm gonna let Greg take the next one. I've got a million.
Yeah, no, there's lots to get to. So maybe if we shift over to the executive order, immediate measures to increase American mineral production. Let's start off just obviously currently uranium is not on the USGS list of critical minerals, but there was a special provision within this executive order basically to include it as part of the minerals subject to the executive order. John, maybe that's something that you can speak to some of the work that the UPA has been doing, both toward trying to get the USGS to get the uranium back on the critical minerals list, as well as it relates to the inclusion in this recent executive order.
Right. The critical minerals is an effort that we are really pushing. We were on the list in 2018 under the first Trump administration, and we were deemed essential for national security. When USGS addressed this in 2022, they removed uranium from the list without even considering the non-fuel uses. Under the original critical minerals legislation, fuel minerals were excluded: oil, gas, coal, and uranium. Obviously, uranium is much different than oil, gas, and coal. We're a locatable mineral, and there are lots of reasons that we're different. But again, the Biden administration didn't even look at the non-fuel uses such as isotopes and uses in defense purposes and so forth. I believe that it's fairly, we're fairly confident that administratively we will be listed as a critical mineral going forward in the Trump administration. UPA is actively working with certain offices in Congress to get this legislated and get this fixed on the fuel exclusion, so it doesn't just bounce back and forth between various administrations, depending on who's in vogue. It was interesting during the Biden administration, DOE did look at uranium as a critical material, and they agreed that it was a critical material and would have put us on their list, except for what USGS had done. So the Trump executive order has listed uranium specifically as a critical material, and what we have done as the UPA is we've urged our members to provide the various agencies with projects that they have that could be helped by this executive order. It's a little unclear exactly what's going to take place. The executive order told the various agencies to compile lists of mineral projects and to expedite their review. We, I think, have 7 companies that have submitted information. My understanding is the Forest Service has not yet figured out what to do with these submittals, but BLM and the others, EPA, have done so. We also met with the National Energy Dominance Council, at least a couple of members from that, and included in that meeting was the fellow that's in charge of critical minerals. And so we made a bit of a pitch to him. And I don't believe they've got a nuclear seat established yet on the council, but that's in the works too. So I think the executive order it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Obviously, regulations are still in place, so I don't know that they'll be able to use the Defense Production Act to completely void NEPA and things of that nature, but we'll see what plays out here. The original executive order, I think, was granted on, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but it was end of March, and the agencies were given 10 days to start doing something. So we'll see. It should be fairly quick that something occurs.
Yeah, I submitted 3 projects on behalf of a couple of clients. So it was a very fast process, and curious to see where it's going. Maybe in that executive order, it is, and correct me, it's focused on projects that could be advanced and overcome some regulatory hurdles in the federal government. Is that a fair statement?
That's very, very fair. Yeah.
So
one example that I know of, I won't name the company, but they had a project that they just acquired that was permitted, I believe, for conventional mining. And they would like to switch that over to in situ recovery. And so rather than go back to square one and have to redo all this, they'd like the BLM to say, okay, everything's in place. Everything was in place for conventional. Now we can switch it over. So that would be something I think that would be fairly simple and very possible. I've heard of, I think, other projects that, like, maybe a particular individual at a federal level has been a bit of a roadblock, let's say, and maybe that roadblock could be removed. And all these projects both have federal and state requirements usually. So again, just getting the federals taken care of obviously will be of great assistance, but you'll still have the state agencies to deal with also.
Yeah. From what I've seen, it's a bit of a linear process, and it just drags it out. And then often, and again, correct me if I'm correct, but often the states don't want to get involved until the feds are done, because it becomes a very expensive burden on their backs.
Yeah, I know last time around in New Mexico, we had a couple of projects on Forest Service, and the state at that time, even though New Mexico has a very rigorous mining act, there were a couple of approaches that were being taken vis-a-vis the state to see how, one was to say, okay, we've done NEPA, this checks off the box for the state requirements, and just go through it that way. But we'll see again how it plays out.
I'll let Greg ask the next one.
Yeah, and this one it's an interesting. Just before we move on from the priority projects discussion, yeah, as part of the executive order, there's a few sentences in there. The chair of the National Energy Dominance Council, NEDC, in consultation with relevant agencies, shall issue a request for information to solicit industry feedback on regulatory bottlenecks and other recommended strategies for expediting domestic mineral production, which I thought was something that was, the request to interact and engage with industry was a really big thing, and something that we don't often see from governments. John, maybe you thought, what could the UPA's role in sort of that interaction be, and how would that work?
Well, we'd love to, there's been a movement in Congress the last couple of years to try to do something with the regulatory authority and how it could be streamlined to some degree and so forth. And again, obviously industry's had some input on that, but I'm sure that again, this Energy Dominance Council has great potential that it could really move things along. And often a problem between on federal projects is you have maybe two agencies and they don't interact. And I think that's one thing that if the Dominance Council asked me one thing they could do, that'd be one thing I would suggest. That they certainly could get like the BLM and the NRC or somebody like that to get with it and move together, as opposed to making one do it and then the next, that type of thing.
I want to just switch a little bit off of production. A strong economy and having a domestic mineral extraction as part of a strong economy. So extremely important. But strong economy depends on having affordable, reliable energy. And that includes a big mix. One of the things that's been a real gap in the nuclear sector is concentration and enrichment facilities. Is this something that UPA is also looking at within its mandate?
Yes, you bet. The Nuclear Fuels Security Act recognized, well, let me go back even a little further. In the first Trump administration, as a result of a 232 petition brought by a couple of our member companies, the president appointed a working group which had representatives from all the cabinet offices to look at the nuclear fuel cycle, and they determined in their report that it was broken. Obviously, we have no enrichment. At that time, we didn't have any conversion. Since that time, ConverDyn, who's a member of the UPA, have gotten themselves back up, but I think they're running about half speed. But they could, get their facility up and going if they had contracts. It's vital that we get some domestic enrichment going in this country, and that was the main impetus of the Fuel Supply Act. The DOE has been relatively slow in getting this rolled out, but they have made some progress. And just last week, I believe, they provided funding to, I believe, 5 or 6 companies that are interested in doing this to essentially assist them in funding the next steps that will eventually result in these companies getting substantial funds to move forward on their projects. General GLE is a member of UPA, and there are others like Centrus and so forth. We've made the pitch for a long time in Congress and with the administration that for our military purposes, you have to have U.S. origin fuel. It can't be, LAS in Hobbs, New Mexico, can't produce it because of treaties. So we have to have a enrichment facility here that can enrich for the submarines. And part of the Nuclear Fuel Security Act provides that these enrichment wannabes, if you will, if they use domestic source fuel, that gives them a leg up with DOE. So some of our member companies, and I'm not privy to these agreements, but some of our member companies are working in conjunction with some of these new entities that want to produce the enrichment. And that's how it'll filter down to the uranium producers.
I have one question, then I'm going to let Greg get a question. Just because it's on that topic, is there not a required reserve for defense purposes for uranium?
Well, yes, that has been sort of set aside lately, but that is the case, and we have advocated that they continue to buy. There's a bit of a tug of war between, the utilities don't want to be competing with DOE for our pounds necessarily, and so that I think has played into that a little bit. But yeah, I mean we do definitely need a reserve, and I think there are plenty of people in the agencies and the Congress that believe that's the case.
Thank you. I'll let Greg go.
Jon, we talked about the efforts by the EPA to get uranium back onto the USGS list. We talked about the priority projects as part of the executive order. One other aspect of the executive order is the accelerating private and public capital investments. So is that something that, with time, do you think that we could see federal government grants or loans or loan guarantees actually all the way up the upstream and into uranium production domestically in the U.S.?
We have not. Definitely that's going to occur with the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, I think, and that will probably go more towards the enrichment people. But we've never really. We were involved in getting the initial $150 million purchase of uranium by the government for this reserve, and we've encouraged that to continue. But other than that, we really haven't been pushing much. We're not asking for subsidies or even loan guarantees at this point. We just want a level playing field, and we want to not be competing with these state-owned enterprises that don't care about production costs. And so as long as we have a fair field, I think we obviously, we have the projects to compete, globally, and we have projects that we have plenty of uranium in the ground here to produce. So really all we're looking for is to level that playing field.
And I think one other thing that's really important is the high environmental standards in North America in general exceed a lot of the other sources globally. I think that would be a fair statement.
Yes, very much so. The U.S., most of the states have very vigorous mining laws. New Mexico adopted theirs in 1993, and we're still waiting to get our first mine permitted and in production in New Mexico. But just general. To differentiate the way it was done back in the 50s and 60s when there were no regulations really of any kind. And now, we have to have a reclamation plan in place before we start a project. We have to have a bond in place in case something goes south on the project. So, it's much different atmosphere here, and the U.S. does have the strictest mining standards of any country, and we're proud of that. And and as I said, we can compete in that venue given a level playing field.
John, I wanted to switch gears just a little bit here, and we've talked quite a bit about the Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act of May 2024 when it was legislated. Maybe obviously there's been a lot of sort of chatter within the sector about what a potential U.S. brokered peace deal between Russia and Ukraine could mean in terms of this import ban. Maybe if you want to just go into a little bit more detail about your take on that and sort of the level of restriction. We talked about the waivers a little bit, but they do have a firm deadline. Maybe just what's your take? What are you hearing from Capitol Hill?
Yeah, well, I find this very interesting myself because to date, we've heard nothing out of the administration that would indicate that the ban is part of the negotiation with Ukraine and Russia. That being said, it's obvious just because of what has occurred in the markets and with our utility customers that people are kind of holding back for whatever reason to see what happens. The ban is legislated. It's a law. It can't be undone without Congress taking some action, and we've certainly seen nobody that we've talked to in our visits on Capitol Hill has even suggested that that's an alternative. The waivers run out at the end of 2027, and again, as I mentioned earlier, we are somewhat hopeful that the initial waivers, Centrus was able to kind of come in and make a case that they really needed the waivers to move forward on their enrichment building up and so forth. And I think another waiver that was granted had to do with the opening of the reactor at 3 Mile Island. That played into it a little bit. Again, we don't have the particulars. They don't give those out, but some of the congressional people get a little bit of information on those. So hopefully that they'll get back to the intent of the act that is that this isn't to be a cost thing. It's supposed to be, we don't have any inventory. We can't keep our reactor going if we don't have the waiver. All that being said, the waivers do end in 2027. I think another area that is of concern to the UPA is what's going on with China right now. The Russian ban was being discussed for quite some time before it actually happened, and in 2021, the Russians exported zero material to China. In 2022, they sent 11.7 million pounds of uranium. 2023, 8 million pounds, and 2024, 9.6 million pounds. So obviously, they started moving material to China when this ban became a reality. In 2021-22, China had no imports to the U.S., and they've imported roughly $600 million worth of uranium in the last 2 years to the U.S. So,
wow.
I can't prove that material is coming into the U.S. had something to do with Russia, but it sure smells like it. And it's very difficult. We have to kind of rely on Chinese custom data to get this information, but it's clear that something's going on. And the Russian ban does have anti-circumvention language in the act, and we also have anti-circumvention language in the suspension agreement between the U.S. and Russia on the trade agreement. So we've been actively um, discussing with the Commerce Department. We'd like to see them get a little more involved in this. They did recently issue a directive to Commerce or to the Customs Bureau to look more stringently, I guess, at their what's coming in from foreign imports. But they are not ready yet to launch any investigation. They just feel like they don't have enough information. We also asked the trade rep recently to increase Chinese imports. And that was kind of a temporary fix. And we asked for a 50% tariff increase. This was during the Biden administration under a Section 301 review that they were doing. That didn't get us any place. And we have also been advocating on the Hill to legislate to ban the Chinese imports. And one thing we've urged there is if we do legislate that, not to have any kind of waivers. So we don't want the utilities to rush to get this material in and then be able to come in and say, we need it because we've already contracted for it. So that's kind of our strategy on that. And there, one thing that's just about everybody on Capitol Hill is receptive to is not feathering the Chinese cap. So I think I'm hopeful that we'll be seeing some action on that in the near future.
One question, kind of going back to a couple of points you made earlier. I find this really fascinating. So Canada is excluded, and uranium is excluded, we think. We have the Russian Uranium Import Act, and there's waivers there. The uranium's moving to China. Imports are coming in from China now. Two questions. The 20% tariff on China, does that include uranium?
Yes, I believe it does.
Okay. What's to prevent a country from shipping it into Canada and moving it that way? Are there restrictions on shipping?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think that would be difficult to do because it's certainly not to Canada's advantage. I mean, when the Russian ban was put into place, not only was the U.S. we weren't producing anything practically, the Canadian production was way down. So I think in my mind it's to Canada's advantage to have these import bans in place. We recognize that we need Canadian production in the U.S. Right now, this last year, I think we're going to get up to maybe 1 million pounds in 2025. We did some informal surveys amongst our group, and I think we can get our production up into the 20 to 25 million pound range, fairly rapidly. I think 5 years, 6 years, something like that. But and of course that all depends on permitting and things of that nature. But we do have 6 members now that are producing, which is 6 more than we had last year. It's vital to have the non-state-owned enterprises. They're fine. We're happy to let them bring their material in because, again, we can compete with them. But the Chinese material that did come in, and again, I'm not 100% on this, but I believe it was sold at a lesser than what the going rate was. So the tariffs, might have an impact, but it's also possible that the Chinese would just eat the tariff in order to have the ability to supply.
I'm going to see if Greg has. I know we've been keeping you a long time. We've had a lot of questions, but
Yeah,
more, Greg.
And it's been really good, John. Appreciate it. Yeah, there was a stat out a couple of weeks ago, and I saw it highlighted again by the EIA that the U.S. produced more uranium in the fourth quarter of 2024 than in any quarter in the past 6 years. So obviously, the UPA membership is doing a good job. But I think full year production last year was just around 680,000 pounds. So you talked about maybe getting up to 1 million pounds this year. We got a long way to go. Obviously, we're consuming probably around 50 million pounds a year domestically. So it's 1 million pounds is a long way from the 25 and a very long way from the 50 million pounds. But what I wanted to ask is a little bit more on that topic. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your thoughts on the uranium market, maybe a little bit on what the incentive price is to really ramp up domestic U.S. uranium production, and in the context of both the current spot price as well as where the term price sits.
Well, I'm not really an expert on production costs anymore, but I think the Trade Tech publishes a number, and my recollection that's in the $60 to $70 range or something like that. And I think obviously people are producing. I think the spot market's now in the 70s somewhere. Under surveys that we did in the past, it seems like $60 was a break even number. But again, I don't, I know it's hard to get pipe and things of that nature that people need and so forth. So I'm not sure if I really can give you a good number, but it just seems like the whole supply demand curve right now is totally out of whack. We're not producing nearly what we need in the U.S. and internationally. I mean, and that number is growing as more reactors come online. And it seems like everybody, both parties, have recognized that nuclear is going to play a vital role in energy production going forward, and with all the increased need for electricity that everybody's talking about. I mean, you go into a congressional office in Virginia, for example, and they want as much electricity as they can get their hands on, and so you get a pretty good reception. That when you go in and say you've got something to do with nuclear. So I think I think that the price could easily get into the $100 range, and not that would make inordinate sense to me. One thing that is always to be considered in nuclear is the fact that fuel is not the major cost of electricity. Natural gas, the cost of gas is basically 95% of the cost of the electricity. In nuclear, the fuel is like 25%, I think, and uranium itself is even less than that. So, I used to tell congressional staff and congressmen that you could double the price of uranium and you're not going to really impact the end user that much. Now I realize the utility fuel buyers want to get the best price they can, but it's a national security and it's an energy independence issue.
Yeah, good point, John. I think I'm going to try and wrap it up now, because I think we've had you on here a long time. Really, really appreciate it. I'm sure we could keep going, so we'll probably have to get you back. But a quick question: you know the book Groundbreaking, correct?
Excuse me.
The book, the book Groundbreaking by
yes.
Ned. Yeah, Ned. I recommend people read it. It's a very good read on the chapter on uranium and also on the Bureau of Mines initiative. He and joint colleague Ann Bridges, their book. I went down a rabbit hole a while back and went into the USGS records, and we have about 22 critical minerals for defense that we source from outside the country. So domestic mineral extraction is extremely important to the country for many reasons. The way I'm sort of wrapping up what I'm hearing from you with the approach at the UPA and the government is let's support domestic production by cleaning up the permitting process and get some wins. We need some wins on the production side. And then put a lot of effort into what really is important government funding to enable us for conversion and enrichment and complete the nuclear cycle. Would that be a fair summary?
That's a very fair summary. You bet.
Excellent. Excellent. I love the work that you're doing at the UPA. I commend everybody on there. Greg, I don't know if you have any final words before we wrap it up.
Yeah, just a big thank you, Jon. And we'd like to end off with one final question for each of our guests. If you could pick anywhere to go in the world on a vacation with a loved one, where would it be and why?
Well, I'm going to Florence for 3 weeks in May, so I guess that would be my answer. My wife and I are going to Florence. We're with the Smithsonian Institution tour, and we've been there before, and we're really looking forward to it.
That sounds just fantastic, especially with the Smithsonian group. That'll be you'll see some very cool items with that. So anyway, Jon, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. That's been incredibly insightful, and hope it gives everyone a little bit of a window into the very valuable work that the Uranium Producers of America does for all of our benefits. So thank you very much, and maybe we'll wrap it up there.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Jon. I'll see you in New Mexico. Another vital piece of the puzzle.
Looking forward to it, Janet. You bet.
You take care. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's been wonderful having our fabulous guest. And thank you, Greg, my co-host. I had a wonderful time today. I've learned a lot.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks,
You
all.
bet. Bye-bye.